Violent earthquake and aftershocks has devastated Burma, one of the poorest countries. It's one of the strongest earthquakes to hit the Southeast Asian country in decades. Thailand also feeling the extent of Friday's 7.7 magnitude quake, with buildings collapsing and trapping many underneath the rubble. Fox's Stephanie Bennett has the latest as the search for missing people continues.
Foreign aid is pouring in after a violent earthquake shook Burma on Friday. The 7.7 magnitude quake triggered the collapse of buildings, bringing the death toll to at least 1,600 people, according to the country's ruling military.
Buildings have been reduced to rubble in just seconds. Teams are telling us that they are even hearing screams from under the rubble, and the screams have been quietened after a bit.
India, China, and Russia are among those sending relief teams into Burma.
A total of about 50 tons of relief material is being transported to Yangon. This includes clothing bricks.
Despite cuts to foreign aid, President Donald Trump said that the U.S. will also provide some assistance. Meanwhile, the United Nations has set aside $5 million for relief efforts. It says extensive infrastructure damage will complicate humanitarian response.
The earthquake will compound an already dire humanitarian situation in Myanmar, where nearly 20 million people need assistance across the country.
The quake also rattling buildings in neighboring Thailand, where families in Bangkok anxiously wait to hear for news about their missing loved ones.
I am praying my husband wasn't working at this site. He usually worked at 2 sites. I told our kids I am here to bring Daddy home.
According to the U.S. Geological Survey's predictive modeling, Burma's death toll could surpass more than 10,000 people. In London, Stephanie Bennett, Fox News.
Hardly any buildings were spared in this earthquake, and so the hospital here in the junta-controlled capital of Naypyidaw has had to move outside. A long line of the injured, a line and list set to grow in coming days. Today the military leader made a visit, but General Min Aung Hlaing kept his distance from the nurses and the wounded, seemingly not here to offer words of comfort, but to show some form of control. The general also travelled to Mandalay, close to the epicenter, pointing, staring, looking at a phone, viewing buildings that looked largely unscathed. Because this city appears hardest hit by the biggest earthquake to strike Myanmar in 100 years. Rescuers have been toiling through the ruins. Today, this woman joined the list of survivors. But elsewhere, the outcome for rescue workers was devastating. After drilling through the rubble at this building in Mandalay, 2 more victims were recovered. The death toll is now above 1,600 and expected to rise.
With colleagues, and there's a town near Mandalay that hasn't really been featured in the news, and 80% of it's been reported as destroyed by our partners and staff. So this is only just coming out now because of the lack of telecommunications. So I think what we know is that the level of destruction, it's going to grow, and we really don't know the full scale of it yet.
The 7.7 magnitude earthquake occurred at 12:50 local time on Friday, the result of the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates rubbing alongside one another. A second quake struck minutes later with a magnitude of 6.4. The fault line was long and shallow, 200 kilometres in length and a depth of around 6 miles. That meant violent shaking was felt not just near the epicenter, close to Myanmar's second largest city, Mandalay, but down to Naypyidaw too. Those 2 cities are under the control of the junta, which only holds pockets of land since the 2021 military coup. The majority of the nation is now in the hands of the opposition, made up of pro-democracy militias, ethnic armies, and local defence forces. With infrastructure crippled in a nation ravaged by a civil war leaving millions displaced, the United Nations said that Myanmar was now facing a polycrisis, essentially a crisis upon a crisis upon a crisis. The junta has invited any country to provide help and donations. Today saw China dispatch teams of rescue workers. Russia did too, sending 120 personnel from Moscow. A cargo plane from India arrived in Yangon, supplying tents, food and medicine. The delivery met by junta officials, the optics of a regime embracing outside help at the same time as continuing the fighting. It was only the day before the earthquake that the junta held a parade to commemorate Armed Forces Day, a a show of strength that continued even after the disaster, with the regime launching airstrikes and drone attacks on rebel areas yesterday and today.